e ngā maungi whakahi, e ngā wai whakariporipo, e whakakau nei, tēnei koutou katoa. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā kārangatanga, maha o ngā haue whā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tare kāka te maunga, ko te awa kairangi te awa, ko whanganui a tāra te kāinga, ko Laurinda Thomas ahau, ko ahau te tumuaki o te rauherenga o Aotearoa. He hui tēnei ki te kōrero tahi, kaitahi, manaki tātou ia tātou, me te mea angitu ki te tūnātahi moa popo. My name is Laurinda Thomas, and I'm privileged and slightly in awe to be standing in front of you today as the LIANZA President. I feel as though I've been thinking about this speech for a very long time, and I could say that I've been thinking about it ever since I've been President-elect, but that's not quite true. I've actually been thinking about it ever since I've been in the seats that you're in now, attending conferences. So I'm going to start off with what I'm not going to talk about. In the past, presidential speeches have often focused on what LIANZA is doing and often some general statements about the profession. And while I think it's important for you to know what LIANZA is doing, I'm not going to talk about that this morning. I'm going to save that for the AGM this afternoon, which I'd all encourage you to come along to. I'm also not going to talk to you about international trends, the greying of the profession, or open anything. I'm not going to talk to you about technology, resilience, innovation, e-books, copyright, big data, or budgets. I'm not going to use the words looking forwards, fiscal constraints, or global financial crisis. But I know that some of you are thinking she just has. Now, these things are all real issues, and they're all important, and they're also really tough topics, and in truth, when you think about them in any depth, some of them are pretty depressing. And if you think about them really hard, some of them are stay in bed, eating ice cream, watching cooking shows kinds of depressing. And I don't believe that it's my job as LIANZA President to depress you, and I don't think we're going to change anything by me standing up here and scaring everyone half to death by talking about all the challenges that we face. But I do believe that it's my job as LIANZA President to help you all build a strong profession and to help you make things not just better, but incredible. And for that reason, I have three things that I'm going to talk to you about today, and they are conversation, elevation, and inspiration. Now, this is probably not what you were expecting, but the reason that I chose these topics is that when we think about the challenges that we face in the profession, it's often accompanied by a lot of grimness and a lot of angst. And all those challenges that I talked about at the beginning are enough to make your anxiety level rise. So if everyone just thinks about budgets for a moment. Did anyone have a positive response to that? Because if you did, we're all coming to talk to you later. Now, just to get you back into the right mood, I think what we need is a fluffy cat photo. So this is Sassy, she's the Pātea library cat, courtesy of Digital New Zealand, thank you very much. So now that we're back in the right frame of mind, conversation, elevation, and inspiration. Now, I'm going to head off a bit of naysaying at the past because some of you are thinking that I've completely lost it at this point. And we need to face some harsh realities, and talking about inspiration, you know, that's just not the real world. And all this reminds me of someone that I used to know. So let me put out a different point of view, because I believe that sometimes we let our view on what we think of as the harsh reality stop us from doing what's really necessary. And we become paralysed by how difficult or hopeless we think things might be. So let's just have some headlines about that so we can get some of those things out of the way right at the beginning. So firstly, not everything goes well all the time. Not everything can be solved. Not everyone will like what you do. And you're not always going to get the support or the money that you think or feel you deserve. So, life is difficult, and people are sometimes difficult. And that's the joy and sometimes the tragedy of just being alive. But it should never stop us from doing what we have to do to grow as a profession. So let's start with conversation. Now, there are plenty of people out there who are convinced that libraries are soon to become an irrelevant fact in the annals of history. Now, some recent favourite headlines that I've seen are D-Day bid to save libraries from closure, the end of the library, and my personal favourite, libraries, the final chapter. What do they have in common? Well, the last example definitely shows us that you can't separate a journalist from a really good book pun. But more importantly, they're really quite gloomy. And nearly every month, someone has the bright idea to write a piece on the demise of libraries. And it's possibly only the story in journalism where they can just keep the copy, change a few words, and republish. Firstly, it was libraries were going to go out of existence because of the internet. Then it was Amazon. Now it's ebooks. Tomorrow, it will be something else. And to be honest, I find that quite boring. Libraries aren't going anywhere. Libraries aren't going anywhere. Journalists, you need to find a new story to recycle. So, the reason that these articles often get airtime is that there's a gap. So if there's no news, it must be bad news, right? So our job collectively is to change the conversation. And I believe that the way we do that is to change our language. Language has power. It shapes how people view our profession and how they view our services. We need to reclaim the power of our profession, and our language needs to reflect that. Now, I've had several conversations with people about words that they've heard used to describe the profession that actually are not helping us in this cause. So here's a couple of examples that I've picked up. The first word is relevant, and we use it a lot. But when was the last time you went to work and you said, "I feel so relevant today"? Good heckle. But can you imagine someone who works in a council and they look after the city sewers saying, "We really need to prove our relevance, otherwise we might not get any funding this year"? Relevant, simply, does not imply essential. It implies nice to have, this might be a good idea, or maybe if we've got some spare cash. The second example I hear us using a lot is reinventing ourselves. Now, have you ever heard a doctor say, "We're reinventing our profession"? No. But we all know that doctors don't do things the same way that they did 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Librarians are masters of reinvention. We've been reinventing ourselves for years, since the beginning of the internet and before. That's just what professions do. So do we have to do it? Yes, we do. But we don't need to keep lamenting that we have to do it. Reinventing ourselves implies that what we do today is somehow completely insufficient. Now, most of you will know that this is Victoria Beckham, or for those of my generation, Posh Spice. Now, before her days of being a fashion designer, before she was married to a famous footballer, and before she was part of what turned out to be one of the biggest girl groups of the 90s, she said, "I want to be more famous than Purcell Automatic." Now, at first take, this is kind of ridiculous. But she didn't say, "I want to be a singer," or married to a rich footballer, or a fashion designer. She wanted to be a household name. And very few people these days would question the need to have washing powder in their house. It's just a normal everyday item, but it wasn't 200 years ago. Can you find alternatives? Sure, if you had to, but would you want to? Well, probably not. It's core to modern life. It's part of our standard of living. It's essential. And this is where we need to move the conversation about libraries. And I'd suggest that if we can't set the bar as high as Posh Spice, our profession is in trouble. Libraries are an essential service, like roads, like healthcare, like education. They're part of a web of interconnectedness. We contribute to educational outcomes. We contribute to the economy. We contribute to business growth. We contribute to community well-being, to technological innovation, to groundbreaking research, to prisoner rehabilitation, to New Zealanders getting jobs, to mental health, to public policy. We are the backbone of New Zealand's health, wealth and well-being. So let's stop being so shy about that. Our profession does amazing things every day. You may not personally feel amazing every day, but somewhere, someone in our profession is doing something amazing all the time. And everyone has a day when they know that they did something great. So it's time to vote those weak, powerless words off the island. Libraries are an essential service. Now, my second topic for today is elation. Now, this is a profession that isn't like others. It's a profession that many of us came into as a second profession. Most of us chose it deliberately. A few of us fell into it. But I don't know if anyone could say, you know, I was determined to be a doctor, but my parents pushed me into librarianship. For most of us, we chose. And we chose it because the thought of working in a library filled us with a special feeling, a special kind of elation. You might think of it as something else. You might think of it as excitement or longing or comfort or joy, but you recognise it in those individual moments when you know that what we do makes a difference in the lives of the people that you're working with. The satisfaction of teaching someone how to find the right answer, or reading to a child, or helping someone register on a job site, or start a new business, of seeing people progress through levels of reading, or through education, or through special projects. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I met a man called Mr. King, and when I told him what I did, he said, "Oh, I have a real soft spot for librarians." And I asked him why that was, and it turns out that Mr. King grew up in South Africa. He didn't have access to education through schools because he wasn't white. But the librarians didn't care. They let him have access to the library every day and let him read to his heart's content. He made no bones about the fact that they were really strict with him as a small child coming into the library, but those librarians believed in freedom of access to information, and Mr. King taught himself in the library stacks. Mr. King is now Dr. King, and he's been teaching the next generation of doctors for 25 years. One of his trainee doctors may have saved your life or the life of someone you know. None of that would have been possible without the courage, ethics, and intervention of librarians. How often do we recognise ourselves for these kinds of accomplishments, for these kinds of impacts, where the seemingly simple changes someone's whole world? It's tempting to say that we just let a kid into the library to read. What that really means is that we helped someone train the next generation of doctors. How often do we reconnect with that pure elation, that pure joy of what we do? Now, I care about this because it changes how we feel about the profession, and it changes how we talk about ourselves. And when we change how we talk about ourselves, the conversation we have about ourselves and that others have about us changes. What's possible changes. Those moments of elation and joy give us the stories that connect us to why we are an essential service. Those moments provide the passion, the will to explore, and the will to dream up new ideas that can connect people to information, the people and the places they need to change their lives. That sense of elation makes the hard things we have to sometimes do worthwhile. And regardless of how we overcome our current challenges, there are always going to be hard things ahead to overcome. Now, for those of you who have children, when you had your first child, did you say, "I'm so happy, and do you know what? I'm not going to change a thing about my life. Everything is going to be exactly the same way as before. I'm still going to go out on Friday and Saturday nights, we'll stay out till 4 o'clock in the morning." No, you don't do that. You get joy, you get tears, it's hard work, and everything changes. Everything changes. And it's wonderful. We have a view of change that says it's hard and it's something to resist, but actually by separating ourselves from change, we separate ourselves from the lows, but also from the highs. And my experience has been that those two often things to come together, and that's scary. I find it scary, but I also find it motivating. The author Fran Lebowitz said, "Every intention, every achievement has come out of dissatisfaction, not serenity. No one ever said, things are perfect. Let's invent fire." Whenever you put yourself out there and you try to change things, it's scary. There's joy, there's tears, it's hard work, and it changes everything. And that is how we move forward. When you see that change coming to life and you know it's going to make a difference, it's wonderful. So when someone says change, don't view it as something to resist or as something scary to be avoided. View it as a way of bringing more joy into your life. So my third topic is inspiration, and particularly how inspiration changes our future. Now, I think everyone has experienced that sense of mild euphoria when we believe we can do anything. It's like opening a window to a new world, a window in us that lets us see what's possible. And coming to conference is a perfect example of that. So we have 4 days here, and at the end of it, we're inspired. We've got so many ideas. We feel somehow freer, and we're full of hope and full of good ideas to take back to our library. You make lots of notes. You think, we'll talk about that when I get back to work. And then you get back to work, and that window of inspiration closes. And you settle in for another year at work, too busy to look for that window of inspiration. When that window of inspiration and possibility opens, we need to keep it open, because that's the window that shows us the future. And we should all care about the future. We're going to live the rest of our lives there. But we don't just want to be part of the future. We want to be that future. We want to be on the other side of that door, so when the future arrives, we're there, opening the door, asking it in for a cup of tea. Now, we're a small country, we're at the bottom of the world, and sometimes I think we feel as though we're a bit behind somehow, as though we're not good enough. There are better things out there, and maybe someone else should blaze that trail instead of us. No, we can do better. Of course we can. But I was recently lucky enough to go to the IFLA World Library and Information Congress, and at every point New Zealand was talked about as a country to look to. I talked to the president of the American Library Association, and she said she always looked to New Zealand for new ideas and research. I attended a session on ebooks, and we have ebooks in more public library systems than any other country I heard there talking about ebooks. I talked to lots of people about the LIANZA Brand Libraries project, and people said, we've never done that. We want to know about that. Tell us more. New Zealand is at the edge of the world. We see the sun rise first. We're setting the bar, and we need to keep pushing. We have an incredible profession, and I'm not saying that we're perfect, or that everything in New Zealand libraries is perfect. We're not perfect. We have a digital divide. Not everyone in New Zealand has the benefit of the same or any level of service. As a profession, we can be stubborn. We get cranky and exasperated, and sometimes we say things on NZ Libs that later we think was probably not such a good idea. But we are also passionate, smart, dedicated, and innovative. We connect, explore, and challenge. We're proud of what we do, and if we aren't, we should be. So let's raise the bar for ourselves. Let's create the future, break new ground, and lead the world. We're an essential service, the backbone of New Zealand. Now, for the doing. The things you see and hear during conference will help you to do this. Here are the ideas, the conversations, and the practical steps that we can take. In every endeavour, progress is made by standing on the shoulders of giants. And every person here has built on what came before them. Your job is to keep building. Because what we do, everyone in this room, changes everything. When you're at conference, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to rediscover the joy of your profession, open the window to the future, change how you talk about what you do, and tell everyone. Nō reira, mā whero mā pango ka angitu. Wai kato tangiwha rau, he piko hi tangiwha, he piko hi tangiwha. Wai ora, wai Māori, wai kato. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.